Hey, welcome. This is the Honest Podcast. I am Anthony, and today I brought to you Nicholas Debs. He's a guy that changed my life in many different ways, but one was shocking me to the core and showing me that there's a way you can live that is authentic, very real, very open and honest. We came from a church that was that had a lot of different people that thought in very different ways, and he was just fully himself. He just believed what he believed, and he wasn't afraid to share what his thoughts were. So I thought to bring him on, and he's going to share a lot of different things in the eschatological. How do you probably say that?
Yeah, I would say eschatology is
Yeah,
all the different views on eschatology.
right. And yeah, we're just gonna take you guys on a ride and see where it goes. So yeah, take it away, Nick.
Hey guys, now that you're saying that, I mean, have you been going to church lately?
Yeah, I've actually this morning we went to a church called Studio up in Greenville, and
Yeah.
we haven't been to that church in a while. But we just felt to go back to something we know, because we've kind of like jumped around trying to figure out where to go, and this place just felt more like home. So we said, okay, it's time to commit to this place and see where it goes. How about you?
I
Have you
mean,
been going to church lately?
Well, I mean, over the last 2 years, I've gone to a couple of things. I was working on Sundays for a bit, and so it just kind of working on Sundays and then even Wednesdays after work, like coming home taking care of a dog. So it didn't really fit my schedule for a bit. And now I don't work Sundays. So and there's even a local church like down the street from my house. I was thinking about going. But my job affords me the ability to listen to sermons, audiobooks, podcasts, literally six
Yeah.
to 8 to 10 hours a day. And so I've done more study over the last 2 years and know the Bible better than I ever have ever going to church.
Right.
So
Isn't it interesting? I think that's something that really like shocked me about you, because when we went to GT Austin back in the day, it's like you reminded
Assemblies
me
of
of
God.
someone who, yeah, Assemblies of God. You reminded me of someone who had this deep, close connection with God, but you were so different to everyone around me, and I just thought, God, there's so many different characters, and you just don't look like one specific person, you know, if that makes
Yeah,
sense.
I mean, yeah, I definitely didn't grow up in the church, and I came to God in a really unusual way to actually on a psychedelic mushroom trip. This is what led me down. So that literally had a period where I don't know how else to explain it. Like I just dropped out, came out singing in tongues for like 10 hours. All of a sudden I could hear the voice of the Lord. Like it completely changed my life. I dropped like 100 pounds within 6 months. Was literally thinking about running away from my family, started working for them, completely changed my attitude, how I treated people. I started compose. I wasn't playing guitar since I was 13, and I always just play like, other people's stuff. All of a sudden I started composing like really long songs, making recording a bunch of stuff. But my life changed like a drop of a hat. Um,
Wow.
I used to wake up at like 4 o'clock every morning and kind of just like pray in tongues for a couple hours and then go and walk for 2 hours, just like praying and talking to the Lord. I did that for like, I don't know, 3 years straight. And it was a long road before I started taking the Bible like super seriously. I used to just like kind of read Jesus's words and knew like supernatural was real. And it took me a long time and I used to read other religions, and I really didn't honestly know what happened. And, as people came into my life, I was very like separate. So there wasn't like,
You weren't discipled.
yeah, I wasn't discipled in churchianity and like how you're supposed to talk and but my relationship with God was like super real, and you have to fast like all the time. And so, yeah, I definitely have a different like upbringing than I think most people I've met in the church. And I don't always even throw out the whole mushroom thing too. Like I actually never used to tell people that, but that is the
I
truth.
think it's important though, because so many people have had these different experiences, but they feel like ousted by the church in many ways, because the people with crazy tattoos coming in and people look at them strange, like, bro, what are you doing here? I just feel like God just really loves the outcasts. There's just something
Oh
about
yeah,
that.
100%. Yeah, have you gotten more tattoos?
I have. There's a
Like your son's
tiny
name or
little
something?
one. No, it's just a tiny little one. It says 1111.
Oh,
That's
interesting.
the only one. Yeah, which is a story in itself, because
That's funny that you say that, dude. Like over the last like 6 months, I feel like I see 1111 all the time, where it's like literally drops.
really, Bro, 1111 has changed my life in so many
Oh,
ways.
tell me about. I don't. I mean, to me, it's like starting to almost like bother me. Like, why do I see this number
That's
so much?
so funny. Well, to me, the 1111 represents like God is clearly talking to you. For me, it's always it comes up like two, three, sometimes 10 times a day. Like 1111, 1101. We see 11. Even the video I just edited for episode 2, the intro video was 101. It's just everywhere. I feel like it's just him saying, I'm here. Like, do you see me? Do you see what I'm doing? Sometimes it means transition for us when we're going through crazy transition and we ask the Lord, like, is this a good idea? Should we go? Should we step in? Then it just comes in like crazy, kind of like you just said, where it annoys the crap out of you. And you're like, bro, I get it. Like, it's everywhere. So to me, it got to a point where I was like, you know what? If I tattoo it on my arm and my hand, every time I see it, I know God is there. I can focus. I can get to what it's really about. So that's kind of what it's been for me. And I've met
Yeah.
so many people that 1111 has popped up for them as well.
I haven't really understood anything of reason why, but I've just I'm not joking. Like I don't know, maybe the last 6 months, I just happened to look at my phone and it's 11:11, or I'm arriving at the client's house and it's at 11:11, and it's just like,
Right?
why do I see the intriguing number so much?
I haven't had the money to get more tattoos, but that one my sister-in-law did with stick and poke. And I was like, this is what I want, you know?
Interesting. It's interesting that you're seeing it as a good thing. I was like, I honestly didn't know what to think about it, and I'm like, am I losing my mind?
Yeah. Isn't that kind of like anything like theology, like signs and wonders, all that stuff? It's scary until you get context. It's very interesting.
Yeah, you're saying that just made me think of something that you told me a long time ago, and I don't, and maybe I'm making this part up of the story. I remember you telling me you traveling around in South Africa with the couple when you like first like came to the
Yeah.
Lord, and did you see
Spiritual
somebody's
mentor.
eye grow back? It was like something about something growing back. Am I making that part up?
No, well, there's a couple of things. The three main stories that I always tell probably is like the first one when I got saved. There was this mama, is what we call like the black mamas in South Africa, and she came up front. She had cataracts on her eyes, and he told Josh, the guy who brought me to Jesus, put my hand on her eyes and say, just pray a simple prayer. I prayed, and her eyes are perfectly well. The other one was a baby coming alive in a mom's stomach, and the other one was AIDS being healed. That was the three like crazy markers for me in healing. This stuff
How did you know that
stuck in my mind.
Did you see like a medical report or anything?
It's no a medical report, but it's what really blew my mind is because I was there every week, and we were always at the rubbish dump helping, and we saw the process of this lady. Well, we didn't see this part, but she was raped by her boyfriend, and she was hysterically crying because she got the report and she brought it to Josh, and it showed she was HIV positive. I remember this was just like a basic prayer from our side. We were in the garden just outside the rubbish dump that we were planting stuff, and it was the next week she came running hysterically up to him, and she showed a paper of her being HIV negative, and we were freaking the heck out, bro. I was like, what is going on? Like an incurable disease just got healed. You know, it was like heaping coals on like the already 12 things that I've seen in the last 2 weeks, you know? So that's kind of how I saw that happen.
Did you see a lot of healing, like miracles, when you're at Bethel School of Music? I've been wanting to.
Honestly, not that many physical healings, to be honest. Like when I was praying for people, this topic has always been very difficult for me, the part of healing, because I don't feel like that I've seen much success in me praying for healings. But the prophetic, it's always been amazing. I've seen so many moments of people's lives changed, or people coming back after and saying like, wow, like what you said, this happened a year later, you know? Healing has definitely been a question mark for me. Not that I don't believe, it's just there's too many times where I can count where I've friends, family members dying that they've like had full faith for believing, or praying for simple things, or praying for my wife, and not seeing simple things healed, you know? I don't know if that makes sense.
I mean, yeah. Well, I mean, why do you think that is? Do you Like,
Ah, man, good question. I mean, I've seen the whole spectrum of you just have to have faith to the opposite side where it's like, well,
you've
like
got
God
your
is
sins.
sovereign, but I think definitely most people just said, hey, you just have to have faith. If it doesn't happen, it'll happen in the right timing. It's to me, it's always been a confusing. Honestly, South Africa, easiest thing in the world. Every time, like almost every time that we pray for somebody, I don't care if it was a headache, if it grew someone's leg out, if it was cancer, if it was a child coming alive in mom's stomach. I've never prayed for someone to come alive like that was dead in front of me, but
Uh-huh.
it was so easy. And when I came to the US in 2014, the first time, I was shocked that it didn't work. It
Interesting.
confused me endlessly. There were moments that it happened, like Mary getting healed from trigeminal neuralgia, like a jaw, like shock jaw, and she got healed from celiac, and it changed our lives because she was deeply sick for so long. But
Couldn't eat anything,
yeah, dude, you were
super
you
minimal.
you saw that process, dude. You were there for a lot of that in the beginning, and she was completely healed from that. So I've seen with my own eyes healing happen, but for some reason in America, it just doesn't seem that common, and I'm not sure why. I'm trying to figure it out myself.
Because, I mean, some people don't think like the gifts are operating like at all. There's definitely
Right.
Christians who think that. And,
Absolutely.
and there's some guys that I like who think that the gifts that basically that God can do whatever he wants now, but that it's different that than the time of the and that they were basically like supercharged from Christ's death up into the destruction of the
Hmm.
temple in Jerusalem. That it was like a second Exodus period, of the 40 years of God doing all these miracles, leading them out of Egypt into the promised land was filled with all kinds of crazy miracles. You don't really see it too much after that. Elijah and Elisha would do some miracles. And this kind of actually blew my mind when I started thinking about it. A lot of the, like, when I used to think of the prophets, they're all doing crazy miracles and stuff. They're really not. They're all prophesying, but they're not doing crazy miracles. But that time between them leaving Egypt, leading up to the promised land, was filled with all kinds of crazy stuff. And that period from Christ into the destruction of the temple and the new covenant as a second Exodus, the same 40 years, was that the apostles were like fueled basically to convert people to let them know like, hey, this is the truth, even though it's really different than what it was. But like, if you're going to stick with Moses didn't make it into the promised land. Who, like, Joshua is the one that led him into the promised land. And just like Jesus, your Yeshua, it's the same name almost, leads you into the
Yeah.
promised land of the new Jerusalem after 40 years. And that it was like, by the grace of God, I'm giving you this 40 years to take as many Jews as possible with me into this new covenant if you're willing, but you have to choose to like kind of go this way. And if you're going to choose Moses, you're not going to make it into the promised land of the new covenant,
Right.
the new Jerusalem. So I thought that was pretty interesting. And so basically I remember the guy was saying like, if that's true, I think the apostles, like, God gave them the authority to just do what they needed. It wasn't like might not happen, that if they said it, then it would happen kind of a thing. Whereas now I think God just does what God chooses, and it's not really like up to us at all. We don't have the authority to just make every single time happen. But it's like, and he put it like this. Okay, well, let's go to the hospital right now. Let's see how many sick kids get out of the bed. How many sorcerers have you blinded? I thought that was a really good one because Paul's were
Wow.
like blinding sorcerers. He's like, how many Christians do you know of blinding sorcerers? Like, anyone? Like, you know what I mean? It's true. But like,
Yeah.
so I think they were endowed, and this will lead into a good thing. Like, I see the day of Pentecost almost as like a down payment, almost like a dowry. Like when in ancient Jewish like customs of marriage, like you would pay the dowry price to get the bride, and that would and then a period of time would go on before the wedding would happen. As they killed Christ, that covenant was basically annulled. And there's a part where Paul's like telling them like that when a woman's like husband dies, she's free to marry again. So Christ was killed, that covenant was annulled, and then he's basically marrying Israel again, but under new terms, and anybody who wants to come can. And that it's like because he's like, hey, I'm coming back, I'm coming. And this was like a gift to show like, hey, I'm coming back for my bride, to literally get people to believe because they were saying such different stuff. And so they were empowered by the miracles so that people would believe, giving them the best chance basically not to come under the curses. And so when you look at Leviticus 26 and Deuteronomy 28, and this is something I think a lot of people miss when we, like, even let me just ask you, are we under the old covenant anymore?
No.
Okay. So for
Well,
the old covenant,
technically, are you
yeah, go
talking
ahead.
about like, because technically there was two covenants, right? There was the Abrahamic covenant that was made, and then there was a second covenant that was made, obviously, by bringing in the law. My
Yeah.
question
Well, there's
was,
even more.
what are you talking about? Right.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, normally when people say the old covenant, we're referring to the law of Moses. Yes, there's the Abrahamic covenant, the Davidic covenant, the Noahic covenant, but I'm speaking about the Mosaic covenant. And so, are we under that anymore?
No.
Okay. So for that to be fulfilled, that was a conditional covenant. You do this, I'll do this. You'll be blessed. If you don't, you're going to be cursed. And God literally straight up lists out the curses. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. We can go through it. It's crazy. You're literally going to eat your own babies. The animals are going to tear you apart. And they agreed. This was a covenantal and I don't ever wanted it to be that way. This is like
The people were crying for a king. They were crying for rules. And obviously Abraham was living this life of righteousness because of his faith. Obviously, for some reason, these people didn't want that, so they were given some lesser version. I don't know. It's
yeah, there's definitely like a lot to unpack here, but like basically God was calling them all up to the mountain, and they were like, no, if we go, we'll die. Like, you do it, Moses. We can't be
right.
God. Like, no way. Like, you do it. Just tell us what to do and we'll do it. And they agreed, And yeah,
It wasn't a focus.
yeah, it was just like, look, and not only that, they agreed to it and then they never even listened to. Like, it's crazy.
Clearly, and so many people died for it.
And
Gosh.
but where I was even going with this was like, for the old, I don't think that's the case at all. I don't think it's a future book.
Right. Yeah, and for the listeners listening, I mean, at the end of the day, we're talking about this, but it's good for you to go research this stuff yourself. I think where sometimes we end up just listening to who's preaching it on Sunday, or we get it in an excerpt on TikTok or whatever, but it's good for you to research and listen to things that are outside of your spectrum of normality. And this is one of those things. It's good for us to hear different perspectives and actually ask questions. It's important. Anyway,
this is not something that I've never heard in all the years I was going to church, someone saying, hey, this is a book about the curses falling on Israel and the destruction of the temple and the exchange of, the covenants in the marriage. And this is where you could get into, to think that the marriage supper of the Lamb is in the future is also doesn't make any sense. Like, is Christ not in you now? Like, are we not under the new covenant now? How could the marriage be in the future but we're still under the covenant now? Like,
yes, yeah, like it says, abide in me and abide in you. It's like we're already one. I never thought of it that way, honestly. Interesting.
well, I mean, even that. I mean, honestly, in my opinion, if you tried to make it something in the future, like, you're almost calling God or Christ an adulterer, that he's still married to Israel and we're still under the old covenant, but we're getting all these blessings in the new covenant. And like the whole thing is that Christ is in you. And I think that in itself is a phraseology, like symbolic of you and your wife. Like, you are, like, when you go in your wife, like, you know what I mean? Like,
That's true. It's kind of like he was saying, like I was saying, our covenant is as close to marriage as possible. It's like the closest analogy. If that's the case, that means like it's not the engaged couple, it's the married couple that it's the closest to. So it's interesting.
For sure. Yes. And this, so I've been studying in all the views of Revelation over the last 2 years, specifically day in and day out. And here in America, bulk of the churches are dispensational futurists, was what it would be the terminology, the scholarly terminology for it. And there's multiple ways to take the book of Revelation. There's the future, where it's all in the future. There's historicist, which is that it's unfolded over time. Like, this part's about the French Revolution and this part's about COVID-19 and this part, just like that it's unfolded like all throughout history, whatever,
Like you're talking about like prophecy.
that it unfolds like a scroll over time, and then there's the idealist way, which in my opinion, some of Revelation you could take as an idealist way in the way that I think is the best way to take it, is that none of it's real. It's all like something spiritual. It's an analogy of like good versus evil, that kind of thing. And then there's the preterist approach, which is kind of what I was just saying, that it's something that was in the future when it was written, but it's in our past. And so it was a prophetic book meant to go out to the churches to warn them about what's about to take place. Right. Jesus had prophesied even along, I think, the Olivet discourse, Matthew 24, Luke 21, Mark 13, he's telling them all this stuff that's going to go down, that he's forewarning them about
like
what's to take place.
But you're saying it's their future, our past.
Exactly.
It's like,
and
we're looking at it like, oh, man, this stuff is still coming. Like, we should look out. And I wonder, like, so what's your thought with when it says like he'll come in like a thief in the night and we taken up? Like, what have you had any thoughts on that scripture?
Yeah, I mean, I think all that would still apply even at that time. Like when he's saying there's going to be wars and rumors of wars, at that period of time, there was now something, the Pax Romana, the Roman peace, that because Rome took over everything, there really wasn't that much like wars going on. And to tell someone in Israel at the time that Rome was going to destroy you, or that was going to happen, they never would have thought that was the case. They were in good with Rome.
The reason the Pharisees were like basically trying to keep peace in the best way, so they will always be at peace with Rome.
Yeah, and there's lots of reasons why I think this. Like I don't believe that it's a book about the future at all. There might be some stuff like at the end, but as the more and more I study it, I don't think so, like at all. And people would be probably weirded out by that, but like the book is constantly saying this is about to happen, this shortly must come to pass. It starts with it, it ends with it. It's constantly said throughout it. And another big thing to know about Revelation, people want to take it as chronological, that it's like a story, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, when the book isn't like that at all. A lot of it's recapitulation, saying the same thing, and it's from a different angle. Plus, it's a giant chiasm. Chiasm is a poetic structure that was used a lot in ancient times because it's an oral way because it would be like A, B, C, D, and then C, B, A.
It's helped people to process things. It's almost like the first part of, I think, Rich Schmidt actually spoke about this in one of his classes, where it was almost like the beginning, the first chapter was also connected to like the 8th chapter, and it was like a period of it like going down. It was interesting. It's really interesting.
It folds in on itself. Right in the middle is Revelation 20, where it says the angel Michael throws down Satan and his minions. That's the exact middle of the book. But like the beginning corresponds to the end, and the second part corresponds to the second part from the end, the third part. And so it folds in on itself. And if anybody wants to do some research on this, Douglas Van Dorn's new book called Rings of Revelation is super good. He got a lot of stuff from another guy named Dr. Warren Gage, which is super good. And Dr. Warren Gage has an awesome stuff on how the story of Revelation is actually the story of the book of Joshua retold, and how Jesus is the new Joshua leading them to the promised land of the new covenant. And it's about the destruction of a city, followed by 7 trumpet blows, where he takes a prostitute out of the city who becomes a royal bride. There's a lot, and there's 2 witnesses, and there's a lot of stuff that corresponds to the book of Joshua through the book of Revelation. That's super cool. So understanding that it's a giant chiasm, first off, it's not literal. And even this is probably going to blow some people's minds. All 4 of the bowls, the judgments, and a lot of people don't think about this, the 7 thunderings, what the angel tells them, like, hey, don't even write about this. But all those 7s, the seals, the bowls, the vials, or the thunderings, that it's literally all the same thing. It's not 4 separate events. One corresponds to one all the way across the board. And it's connected to what I was saying in Leviticus and Deuteronomy, the curses. God tells them 4 times, it's going to be 7 times worse for them. And so John is pulling, the author of the book of Revelation, John, is pulling from the themes of that. And you have to know that John is constantly pulling out every verse. There's over 500 cross references to the Old Testament. Literally every verse you have to go back to the Old Testament. In my opinion, it's God's magnum opus to literally make you understand all of the Old Testament. You're going to be pulling from Ezekiel, from Zechariah, from Daniel, from Joshua, and he's taking all these concepts and themes and compiling them into one magnum opus, into everything that they were looking forward to, and to the fulfillment of the covenant into the new covenant. And what they were looking forward to, and this is a big one that I don't think people grasp, and once it hit me, I was like, dude, this makes total sense, is that what was it like in the covenant? We take it for granted now. We have Christ with us now. When we pray, what was it like in the Old Testament? They had to go, one went into the Holy of Holies once a year, and that's it. Like, that's how it was. And
except for David.
Except for David. Yeah. David did some cool stuff. I think he was a prototype of how it's going to be like in the future. But
the line of Jesus makes sense.
But this is what they used to do. I never hear anybody talk about this. They used to cast lots. That's how they would throw. It's almost like throwing dice, and that's how they would determine the will of the Lord. That's one way. And they don't know this one. There's not details on this. So, the Urim and Thummim, a thing that was connected to the ephod that the high priest wore, who also had 12 gemstones that corresponded to the 12 tribes, that spoke somehow. So people have theorized because the tribes' names were inscribed into the stone, so the Hebrew alphabet maybe was on there, and that it glowed or something like that. It's not really said. It's just really mysterious. But an angel showed up and told them. And there's a lot of weird terms that people don't realize it's an angel. The angel of the Lord, the word of the Lord, the face of the Lord, the arm of the Lord. Those are all terms for the angel of the Lord. And sometimes it'll be like, Gideon turned and saw the word, or heard the word of the Lord. No, or saw the word of the Lord. And you're like, how do you see the word of the Lord? It's because it's a name for the angel. It's just, Douglas Van Dorn actually has a book on the angel of the Lord that's really good, that shows all these parts in the Old Testament, and which in my opinion is Christ. Christ is the one that's constantly showing up. And another thing that would be weird for people, unless you're a Jehovah's Witness, I think the angel Michael is also just another name for Christ. Michael, it means who is like God. And there's a part in Moses' song where he's saying that Mikael, like saying who is like God, and that it's not really like a name. It's just almost like a title. And you'll see in Daniel where it says like Michael is the prince of Israel. And then there's like other princes. That's a term for like an angel or a principality that's like over other nations. And that Michael is the one who's over Israel. And the reason that really kind of changed my mind on this too, like I was saying, Revelation is a giant chiasm. So is the book of John, who was written by the same author of Revelation. John and Revelation go hand in hand. Not only are they both chiasms, they correspond where the end of John and the beginning of Revelation work in on itself. In the beginning of John, or vice versa, they're crisscrossing with each other. And right in the middle of John, it says Jesus like threw down Satan, and right in the middle of Revelation, it says Michael threw down Satan, and that they're like interchangeable. In my opinion, it doesn't really matter, but Jehovah's Witnesses do believe that. I mean, when I first heard it, I thought it was really weird, and there's maybe a couple other reasons that are escaping me at this time, but it is interesting to think that like a lot of go ahead.
My question is like, how has this connected with your relationship with God? Do you hear his voice? Do you just know like in what way, what does your relationship with God look like on the daily? I think it'll probably even help people process why you think the way you think, or why you ask the questions you ask to the Lord.
Yeah. So I purposely used to stay away from Revelation and even thinking about this kind of stuff, because anything that I had heard, I thought was so weird that I just didn't care. And then as time went on and I started, my girlfriend at the time was kind of pressuring me to like answer some questions. And she said something like, I want you to know like Genesis from Revelation. And I started using that as a prayer, like, God, like, I want to know from Genesis to Revelation. Like, I really want to know the actual story. I want the overview. Like, because there's I knew a lot of pieces of the Bible, but it was just like some massive jigsaw, like that never really fit. Like I knew the stories, but I don't. And so I really I was like, dude, I just want the story like from A to
Right.
Z, and obviously there's still a lot to learn. I mean, but I feel like I have a massive grasp from A to Z now. And a huge part of that too, and this is something I brought up earlier off camera, was biblical chronology. To understand, and this used to really bother me,
Not even close.
that the Bible is not in chronological order, that it's set up in genres to where you'll have the Torah, which is right, and then you'll have like like whatever, Joshua and Samuel, but then you'll have like the history books and the poetry books, and then the major prophets and the minor prophets. But you'll all of a sudden you'll hit like Ezra and Nehemiah, where they're already rebuilding the Second Temple before they've even like been into Babylon or been cast out. And so if you're just trying to read the Bible straight through, it's absolutely retarded. They decided to, whoever came up with like, hey, this is how we're going to lay the Bible out, but it was a big mistake in my opinion. And so whoever's listening, dude, look up chronological order of the books. There's some debate a little bit, but understanding like where the prophets sit in the timeline makes a really big difference, because I think most people have a really hard time with the prophets, you know, Isaiah, Jeremiah, that it's kind of crazy. I just don't think people grasp it at all. Some of the minor prophets are super cool, like Obadiah and Habakkuk were really cool books, but like knowing where they sit, is it during the Assyrian captivity? Is it during the Babylonian captivity? Understanding like, is it when they came back to build the temple? And this is where I think a lot of people are dispensational futurists. There's going to be a third temple, and it says so in Ezekiel, and they don't understand that it's like, dude, Ezekiel, that's like when he's in Babylonian captivity, and there hasn't even been the second temple rebuilt yet, and that's what he's talking about. He's just going to skip over that temple, and he's talking about the third temple. Like, I don't think so, dude. Like, it's like they take so much stuff like out of context, and first off, either they just don't understand it, so they throw it in the future, or they don't get that it's not in, like, dude, you just lay it out in chronology. Like, it makes total sense that he's talking about the temple that's about to get rebuilt by Ezra and Nehemiah and Zerubbabel and stuff.
Huh.
So I don't agree with any of the stuff with the third temple. I think all that's contrived. I think there's a lot of stuff between dispensationalism, days, Judaism, and Islam that all kind of have this weird eschatology mixed together, and they're all kind of fueling each other. And that's a lot to unpack, but I'm not going to get into all that. But
Obviously, for those who don't know, and Islam, there's they speak about Jesus as well. Jesus is a major prophet in their book, but he isn't the Son of God in their book. But you're right, there's a lot of cross-referencing of Jesus, the Torah, the Old Testament. It's interesting.
Well, they're all looking for a lot of the same things, but there's the characters play different roles, like basically. Like right. Today, like and this is another weird one that most people probably, I think they've made the Antichrist into a big boogeyman, and they've taken passages and they've taken a bunch of passages and they've amalgamated them together into one big scary dude, when like the Antichrist isn't even mentioned in the book of Revelation at all. And they've taken from 1 John and 2 John, where he's talking about people who deny that Christ has come in the flesh. And I think it's mostly dealing with like Gnostic teachings at that time.
Who truly have heard, but they don't believe.
Well, I would think it has to, like people like maybe even the priesthood of Israel, or people who the Gnostics would believe like that the flesh is bad and that there's no way God came like into the material realm. That we're supposed to like get rid of the flesh. The flesh is evil, and so they wouldn't believe that like God would take on flesh, kind of it.
I see. Like they went to the extreme form.
Yeah, I mean, if you never looked into Gnosticism, but that's like a huge thing.
So coming back to that first question, what does your relationship with God look like on the daily?
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up again. So I didn't used to study honestly that much. I liked hearing the word. I would read a little bit. Like I did know a lot of stories. As I came into this understanding, this is where I was going with this. There's so many pieces throughout the entire Bible started to unlock to where it became this crazy story that was so interweaved that made so much more sense that I cannot wait to get up and read the Bible. I can't wait to hear people I love listening to the 3-hour long debates, maybe 3 of them a day. people hearing from all sides. Like I can't get enough of just like trying to grasp what is actually going on in this book. And I actually just care about the truth. And I'm willing to like humble myself and be like, yo, I was wrong about this, or I just didn't even know about this, or
Right.
And I feel like I received it with gladness too. Even some really stuff that like I had, even when I first heard about some of the stuff 2 years ago, I was like, that's super weird. Like that can't be right. And then like it can't kind of kept resurfacing. And and then when I actually started looking into it, because you're going to have like some cognitive dissonance on like what the Revelation's not about the future. Like we're not living in the end days. Like right now, the Antichrist isn't walking the planet. So it's made me like love actually researching the Bible. The more you're sitting with the word like that too, it's like you're not going to want to go out and do crazy stuff. And I keep busy with, I've got pets that I deal with, and I feel like a little single dad to my fur babies. And then, I work and I study the Bible, and that's kind of about it. And so I don't feel like the Lord has to like coddle me and like hold my hand, that I almost feel like, okay, I'm matured.
You trust yourself and your judgment, because you found out that it's almost like your thoughts are his thoughts, and you trust his thoughts when it comes. You're not worried anymore that you are convoluting your own voice with his.
Yeah, the word I was thinking of was like integrated.
That makes sense.
Integrated with God, like, and less separate. I don't know.
Yeah.
I feel like that's the best way that I could put it. That I feel like I'm on the right track, and like I'm finally understanding like the puzzles like kind of coming together. And I don't know. Yeah, I just feel like less disjointed. And I don't know. I guess that's the best way that I could put that.
Right. It'd be really awesome for you to actually put some, and you've spoke on off camera, you spoke about the desire to actually put together a packet of some sort that would allow people to get these years and years of research into a more palatable way.
Yeah, I plan on making a documentary, kind of going through each chapter of Revelation and kind of giving some different viewpoints that I think people are used to. Even just let's just break down maybe a couple more things. Like even like the number 666, number of the beast, the big old scary number. Some other manuscripts, the number 616, and that's kind of weird, right? Like what's up with that? So when you take Greek and you put it into a Hebrew, the gematria, to get 606, and it's either Nero is the beast, in my opinion, is the principality behind Rome that fuels the different Caesars, the seven-headed beast. You've got Julius, Augustus, Tiberius, Caligula, Claudius. Nero is the sixth head that is five that have fallen, six that is, the seventh that's coming must come for a short while. Galba was the seventh, who reigned for about 3 months. But we're getting back to the numbers. When you take the Greek into Hebrew, Caesar Neron translates to 666. When you take the Greek into Latin, you drop the N, which is a value point of 50. It's Caesar Nero, it's 616. And the whole point was to hide this, because the letters were going out to the seven churches, and it was a mail route too. The seven churches were listed from where John was. Every single Hebrew at the time would know exactly what John's talking about throughout this entire book, because you have to be familiar with the Old Testament. First off, in the most modern churches, they don't even teach out of the Old Testament, really. They might talk about David. They might talk about Adam and Eve.
Yeah, it's not.
Yeah. It's not a comprehensive teaching from the Old Testament. And I saw a statistic that 80% comes from the New Testament of like churches nationwide in America. And that of that 80%, 60% is just from the letters of Paul. So they're literally just hearing from Paul a huge portion of the time. Most people don't have a very good grasp on the Old Testament.
I know.
Revelation.
Yeah.
It's like hearing Chinese. And so you literally have to go back almost every single verse, because it's constantly drawing from specific verses or allusions to these things. And it's what this is bringing to my mind. So, okay, so I just dealt with like the prince, the seven-headed beast, the beast from the sea. There's two beasts. When you are in Israel and you look over across the sea, the waters is where Rome would be coming from. And not only that, the people of the land, Israel, they're known as the land people, and the Gentiles are the sea people. And so the beast coming up out of the sea, that's why I think that's taken from. And that the beast coming out of the land actually is the priesthood, like the old covenant high priest, pharisaical priesthood is where I believe that's about. And where where I've really started strongly believing that about the land beast, is so in, like I was mentioning earlier, the giant chiasm, where you'll have the two beasts corresponded to the two witnesses. And to most people, if you tell them like, well, who are the two witnesses? I don't believe the two witnesses were two actual people, just like the two beasts aren't two actual people. The beast is the principality behind Rome, the kings, and this land beast is the principality, the people behind the priesthood. And so it's the same with the two witnesses that are corresponding with each other, because it mentions the two lampstands and the two olive branches. It's taking you to Zechariah, and it's taking you a chapter that's about Zerubbabel and Joshua. And Zerubbabel is connected to the kings. He wasn't the king at the time, because there was no kings in Israel, but he was from that line, and he was like the governor. He would have been king at that time. And Joshua was the high priest, like at that time. And so it's corresponding to like kings and priests, and it's like the evil kings and priests and the godly kings and priests, and they'll take in there and all the stuff. It makes it really seem like it's talking about two literal people, but it's like he's pulling from all this stuff from the Old Testament, like different little parts of like the saints and the prophets of the Old Testament. And he's like turning it into a story about these two witnesses. And then, and there's a lot of stuff too. And where a huge mix up, I think a lot of people get to, is the dating on the book of Revelation. This one was ridiculous when you look into it. Everyone says it's in 95, the reign of Domitian, but it can't, it makes absolutely no sense that it is. And their reasoning behind that are absolutely crazy. And one of their strongest reasoning is a quote from one of the church fathers. I'll put quotes, like I don't like that term. The church fathers are the apostles, Irenaeus. And it's a quote about seeing John. It's like the way he words it makes it seem like John saw his vision at the time of Domitian, but it's worded really weirdly. And you can look at some of other things that Irenaeus has said. He's talking about that he saw John at the time of Domitian, not that John saw his vision at the time of Domitian. And so there's this weird, that's literally their best evidence. And it's like so flimsy and weird. And not only that, Irenaeus also says a lot of stuff like Jesus' ministry lasted 15 years and he died when he was 50. So there's like all like the internal evidence of Revelation 100% has to pull you back before the Jewish and Roman War. I would put it at because Nero died at 68. So sometime even before Nero, because it says the sixth head that is, which I believe that, like I'm saying, that's Nero, that it would put it, 65, 64, something like that. And in that same chapter, we're talking about the two witnesses, chapter 11. It talks about how the temple's still standing and that the Gentiles are going to trot it down. And people will try to be like, well, that's the spiritual temple. And I'm like, dude, or the heavenly temple, like our Gentiles trotting down the heavenly temple, like doesn't even make sense. Like, so obviously the temple's still standing. There's no mention whatsoever about any of the temple being destroyed from any of the letters. And while we're talking about the dating, I believe every single book was written pre-70 AD, that all the letters, when you hear there's so much imminent talk from all the epistles, and everyone's like, this is about to come, this is shortly, like he's not going to delay, all the imminent.
It seemed like they were either confused at Jesus' second coming, or his second coming meant something different than what we understand it meant.
Yeah, and it's
interesting.
I think they're just so off on what the language, that you have to understand the apocalyptic poetic language and the terminologies they use, like the mountains are going to shake and the stars are going to fall and the heavens are going to roll like a scroll, and none of that stuff's literal. I've heard literally people be like, when did the stars fall? Like, that didn't happen. When did the sun go dark? And it's like, dude, if you just read the Old Testament, that same language is being used all the time when there's other armies coming to destroy a nation, whether it be Babylon, Edom, Egypt. There's you can find this exact same language. It's not literal. It's like I'm so mad, I'm gonna smash this phone to pieces, or I don't know. Sometimes you just say stuff.
It's like metaphors, or
it's
makes sense.
apocalyptic language.
Yeah.
And
So where do I even start? Where to start to learn the correct way to read the Bible, to understand it fully? How did you go from I have no clue what's really going on to now you've stepped in and you said, you know what, even if I am not fully correct at the end of the day, at least I can say that I'm giving my all to fully trying to understand this process and whatever it may look like. What suggestions would you have for people listening?
Sure. And, dude, if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. Dude, show me differently, and I actually studied this. For 6 months, trying to disprove it, constantly looking like, I don't know, this is weird. Like, the more and more I looked into it, the more and more I was like, dude, I think this is true. Like, I think this is true. And the thing that, really got me in the beginning was like all the time texts where Jesus is like, some of you are still going to be standing here by the time you'll see the Son of Man coming in his glory.
Right. That's really hard. That's one of the hardest verses for me to make. I think it's Matthew 16 verse 24 or 18 verse 24. Yeah. Because it is, again, these apocalyptic words,
Well, even when you just read Matthew 24, all the stuff is so localized where he's like, flee to the mountains of Judea, or like, on the rooftops. Like, he's obviously not talking to the whole world. It's so localized. And what's really interesting, during the Roman and Jewish War, which lasted 3.5 years, which is 1,260 days or 42 months. And the siege on Jerusalem lasted 5 months, which we can get into this whole locust scorpion thing in a second from chapter 9.
Man, I wish we had like another good hour to unpack.
So yeah, looking at the time text, there's so many of them. There's so much imminent talk. There's like 4 or 5 directly from Jesus's mouth when he's talking to Caiaphas, and he's like, you will see the Son of Man coming. Like, okay, like and coming on the clouds is judgment language that you'll see all over the Old Testament. And it means like armies coming in. And then when you're looking at even at like second coming verses, and I'll back up and say this too. And there's some, you can make some theological assertions that maybe what happened to Israel is like a micro thing that might be happening to the whole world, like as a macro thing. And it's like, but I don't know. I think a lot of this stuff is there for us to glean, and that we don't need to look at specific verses of like, who's the beast and who's the false prophet, and that this is all past and this is not. Yes. And so for people who want to look, what you need us to look into is preterism is the term. And
what does that mean?
So preterism means that it was future when it was written, but it's in our past. So the book is prophetic, but that it's over now. Like, it means like in the past.
Yeah, it's past. It's past prophetic. It's prophetic about the past. It's interesting.
So, and really awesome.
So coming back to that, like that specific, like how can people start on this journey that you have gone on? Like, how can people begin? Like, because I'm sure this is overwhelming for like the general. There's some people that might be watching this thinking like, dude, I am on your wavelength. But there's groups of people that are like, bro, like I'm still trying to figure out how to get rid of my addiction and my sin. Never mind. Yeah. Like, it's like, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's funny when it's like laughable in some ways, but you realize, well, if you really start deep diving in the word, if you really start like deciphering what's going on, you don't have time to sin. You don't have time to watch pornography. You don't have time to go out and party, It's like does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, no one's ever going to be perfect. Like, I mean, I would say, how do you get, well, let me just answer your question for preterism. Once you know that term and you're able to look up people, like, you get out of the dispensational futurist world, which is what all the teachers and churches in America teach for the most part, you realize that there's many scholars, like most people don't even realize there's another way to interpret Revelation. And so they've never even came across anybody who's talked about it. But the most competent biblical scholars I've heard are the dudes who know this kind of thing. Dr. Kenneth Gentry, Dr. Warren Gage, Gary DeMar. He's got a book called Last Days Madness that's absolutely amazing. Douglas Wilson. And I don't agree with everything about all these guys, but these are guys who definitely would be called partial preterists. And then there's some people who take some things even much further. Like all four of those guys still think that there's like a literal second coming of Christ, who's gonna, reign from Jerusalem, or, there's so much to unpack here.
Which is so hard because, like, how do you look at it as a past prophecy and then yet he's still coming in flesh? It's really interesting.
Yeah, they think. I'm just like, I just think that we have what they were looking for. They were, like we mentioned earlier, they were casting lots. There was one dude, like, people just take for granted what we have. Like, dude, we have access to God 24/7. Like, God is dwelling with us. I don't think there's any Christian who would say differently. And for you to say that, that means like the tabernacle, the Feast of Tabernacles has been fulfilled. God is dwelling with us 24/7. That's the symbolic nature of what that is. Like, we're still not waiting for those 3 autumn feasts to be fulfilled: the Feast of Trumpets, the Day of Atonement, and the Feast of Tabernacles. Like, all that stuff is fulfilled. We have Christ with us 24/7. And it's our job to be the hands and feet to go disciple nations. And this is where I think people have it messed up. If you think that it's supposed to get really bad and we're going to be raptured off this planet, and why would you go and fight in our government, fight for our media, fight for our kids? Like, like, it's our job to disciple the nations and to make this place a better place for everybody. And I think and I talked to you about this off camera, the book of Maccabees. That book is absolutely phenomenal. And it's about a family that stands up to the Greek emperor Antiochus Epiphanes, who's wanting to come in, make them eat pork, change the times and laws. And he was like a shadow picture of, like, basically, Nero, who was horrible. And he's just like he was a dude who was prophesied about was super evil, doing all kinds of messed up stuff. And this family, the Maccabees, stood up and said no. And I think that's literally what's missing in the church. Like, we have people who are ruling the earth who aren't good people, and we're just kind of sitting by, letting them run the show. And I think this is where I believe right now is like a call to Christians to be like, look, wake up. We need to get more involved. Like, it's our job to be the ones, like, we're supposed to be the head and not the tail, and the lender, not the borrower. Like, we're the ones who've been empowered to be a royal nations of priests. And I don't see that really happening much. And I just don't think people are, like, really know their identity and who they are. And I just think we're supposed to stand up, say no, and start to kind of, like, take authority back on this planet. Like, and that's what I would like to see more, is like, I'm tired of those who are in positions of power who are just wicked people, So, and I think as more and more people wake up to want to be like, I want to get involved in the media, I want to get involved in politics, and just be like, we're going to be beamed off of this planet. We don't have to worry about this anymore.
It's almost like a survival method, a survival thinking,
There's something about it to where it's like, I don't understand, like, how that has taken such a strong grip on the church, like, that it doesn't make sense. We're supposed to be here making things better.
Isn't it about drama? Like, it sounds like this dramatical story where the good will win, bad will lose. Because we said yes to God, we won't suffer. But Jesus definitely didn't speak about a lack of suffering if you're a Christian,
Yeah, I mean, I think we're supposed to pick up our cross. I think it's a love issue. Like, if you love Christ and you get to know Christ, like, you're not going to want to do that kind of stuff. And and how are you supposed to know Christ? And this is to answer your question before. How do you get to know Christ? Like, look, he's given you his word for you to study. That's a good way to get to him. And then you get alone by yourself.
Yeah. Which, I mean, we can end with this basically, but I think that's something that always drew me to you specifically. It's like, you were so different, but it's almost like your life was in shambles. Things fell awry. God came into your life. You were working out your salvation with fear and trembling. You were going through these really hard times. You're still trying to figure it out. And at some point, your love for God and the pursuit for him has not only drawn you closer to him, but has truly brought you peace, has brought you to a place where you see the world for what it is. You love the world. You love the people of the world because you love Jesus. And at the end of the day, it gets you to this place where you see like, oh, the nations of God should actually help make this place a better place. You know, I think it's so beautiful. Like,
Yeah, I mean,
you've gone on is just like led you to a place where the understanding has brought you not more pompousness, and you've become more humble. You've become more focused on truth, more focused on loving people, like living a humble life filled with goodness, staying away from sin. You know, it's just beautiful.
yeah, and this is, and if I don't know where we're at time wise, but like ending on this is like, look, when you understand, like, if the revelations in the past and that and there's the mountain of evidence that points to that, and we didn't even get into anything like really from chapter to chapter, from times, all that kind of stuff, like that. I didn't even, a huge one. This, I'm going to say this too. The term earth in Revelation doesn't mean the whole earth. It means land. It's a Greek word, or gay. I don't know how to say it, but it means land. And so that's a really big one for understanding that this is about the destruction of Israel and not the destruction of the entire world, or half or 2/3 of the world. This is, like I said, I'm going to make a documentary that's going to go through this a lot.
This is important. And if people who watch this documentary or this podcast, if people want more, you know, they can request, and you can email me at honestlifeconsulting@gmail.com. And if you want more of this, we'll just bring Nick back, and he can deep dive a little bit more about very specific things or questions that you guys might have. But I just think it's so important.
Yeah. And when you understand it as this way, it's like you're not in constant fear of like, dude, we're in the end days. The Antichrist is about to show up anytime. Right. I got to look at every bit of headlines because we're living in the prophetic end of the world. Like, we really almost didn't scratch the surface on anything. And when you understand, like, dude, that's in my past. I don't have to worry about that. I can just focus on God and loving people. And like, dude, we have what the prophets were looking forward to. What we have is so much better. Like, there's like, our offerings are accepted now. Our sin is forgiven now. They literally were used to, what is it, in Amos or Malachi? They're weeping on the altar because God won't accept their sacrifices anymore. Like, God accepts our sacrifices. Like, we are forgiven. We don't have to walk in fear, and we're here supposed to disciple the nations to make things better. And I would love, if we're going to do this again, there's so many other ways to interpret. Like, there's even, there's things about how to interpret the millennial reign. Is it pre-mill, all mill, post mill, full preterism? There's all kinds of stuff to look into, but I mean, really looking into preterism, if you're interested, I mentioned a couple other names, two other really good guys, Michael Sullivan, Don K. Preston. There's so much material out there. Steve Gregg is awesome. I don't agree with everything that dude says either, but I feel like a lot of thoughts that I would have, I would be like contemplating this thing, and then God would just like randomly pick somebody. I would just like pick someone to listen to, and they'd be like talking what I was just thinking about. And it's like God led me to a lot of the right people for specific topics.
Wow. That's so cool, man. I'm excited. Like, it's interesting because this conversation makes me more excited to understand it deeper. I feel like we didn't speak much about this, but I feel like what you're saying is the key to getting free from sin in many ways too. It's just this deep desire for the word and actually understanding the word, so you don't feel like you're frustrated all the time. Like, it opens a space where you're like, oh God, I understand who you are. I understand that this is a book of love, a book where it's like you're fighting for your people, but like pushes you towards him. Like, you start living in the spirit, and when you live in the spirit, you no longer desire the things of the flesh. It's like this beautiful butterfly effect almost. It's just, I'm excited to deep dive into that more, and in the next one, where I want to ask you questions about like, what does sin look like for you? What does addiction look like for you before and after this pursuit? I think it's super valuable because many people look at the Bible and think it's boring. Like,
Man,
I've read it. Really, do I have to go through this thing again? And I just think if people start seeing the Bible for what it really is and not for what they have been told it is,
dude, yeah, so good.
Transform people's lives, I think.
Of God so much more. It's crazy. Like, it really did.
That's to me, that is the crux of all of this. There's the pursuit of knowledge. and there's the pursuit of love, right? You did both. You know, you started with this because your ex asked you, hey, like, I need you to know this. And it pushed you to fall into the space of learning, but also it just, you seem like a different person to the person I remember before doing, cutting boards, to now just this wealth of knowledge in scripture. And it's really cool, man.
Yeah, I just encourage people. Thanks, man. I encourage people to just look at and even what I'm saying, like this is what I lean towards as the interpretation, but like I like hearing all the viewpoints. And I'm telling you, if all you've ever heard is futurist, like you're really missing out on some really cool information because you're missing out on a lot of history. Like looking into one of the he was a Jewish Pharisee who was a Roman citizen, who's a very well-known historian who basically accounted all this stuff. So he's not a Christian. He wasn't like making stuff up to fit any Christian things. His name was Flavius Josephus. Josephus, anybody who's, talking about preterism is going to bring up Josephus, and then also Tacitus. But so all kinds of cool stuff about history, understanding. I think a good prayer, like I mentioned earlier, is like, God, like, let me teach me from Genesis to Revelation and how it all interconnects. Like that's a super good prayer. And yeah, so
that right there should be like the title. Say that again. It's like, teach me. Say that again. Teach me.
Oh, the prayer. Teach me from Genesis to Revelation and how it all interconnects. We didn't really talk about Genesis at all, but yeah.
That's okay. Well, I mean, this is just the beginning. I feel like this is going to be a big legacy of your life that you'll leave behind. I think a lot of people are going to be interested to hear more. So, well, yeah, that was fun, dude. I'm glad I got to do this with you. We've been friends for quite some time now, and I'm glad I get to give you a space to just go for it. Awesome. Well,
you know, first century history that it literally just like locks in like a glove. It's where I'm honestly like I almost have really like no doubt about it anymore. But
so cool.
I'm still open to be wrong and willing to humble myself, just like I was to even get into this position.
Right, 100%. It's beautiful. It's very good to see. I'm excited to upload this and to see people's reactions because, some people might think as you start, you're like, oh, just another theological conversation of eschatology. But then it ends with just this clear thing of like, oh, this is not about puffing up your knowledge. This is truly about discovering who Jesus really is.
Yeah, 100%, dude.
So cool. Awesome, dude. Thanks, man. Thanks for hanging out. And for everyone, like, subscribe, share this with anybody you think might be interested in this topic. I think it could change your lives. Yeah, dude. See you later, man.
Later, bro. Love you, man.